We have an all-star panel here today. I'll start from the end. We have Captain Jonathan Baxter from the San Francisco Police Department. We also have Mr. Jimmy Brown, who's a counselor therapist from the Oak Grove School District. Next to him, we have Laura Clendaniel. Laura works with kids, the Healthy Kids Foundation, and we're glad to have her here, all of our panelists. Next, we have Tayun Flack from the YMCA. She's Chief Program Officer and also a board trustee from the Gilroy Unified School District. And then next we have Sheriff Bob Johnson, our newly elected sheriff for the county of Santa Clara. And next to him we have Mariko Sayak from Cassie. And Cassie, she is the Executive Director for Counseling and Support Services for Youth. So let's give our panelists a nice round of applause. Okay. We also have a few dignitaries. We have the superintendent from the Mount Pleasant School District, Ms. Alita MacArthur. All right. And we also have from our law enforcement, Mr. Gil Gurpreet. So welcome. All right. All right, so I'll begin with the first question. And the first question we have for Captain Baxter. What are some common problem areas you have seen regarding fire safety at schools?
Thank you for that question. Fire safety and the word problem kind of interchange with life safety and property safety. So when we're looking at measures that are in all of our schools in California, but specifically the Bay Area, we have the basic fire alarm panels, the enunciation panels. Those are the alarms that will go off when someone either pulls a actual pull station, which is the red box that we see in hallways in some of our buildings to make the fire alarm go off. And it will typically go to a fire dispatch center where we can get a response to your emergency within 3 to 5 minutes in a given area here in the Bay Area. Some problems that we see with that are the infrastructure, not making sure that those systems are up to code. They should be inspected. And also having drills. We say prepare, plan, practice, repeat. And when we're talking about preparing, planning, and practicing, that includes the adults, that includes the teachers, that includes the children, and it should include the parents at some point, because you never know when the disaster is going to come to your facility. Not necessarily going to be during normal school hours. It could be like right now, where you have mostly no students here, but we have lots of visitors here. We've seen time and time again drills at schools where some of the teachers or the administrators are sitting at their desks as the alarms are sounding and the kids are exiting, the students are exiting. What message is that sending to the students? It's not really sending the term urgency, right? And we've also seen kids who are older in high school, if we will, who have been visually imposed to this, and they're not going out when we see the fire alarms sounding. So you can imagine with history, when we look at fatalities and we look at mass injuries at a given location, not necessarily a school, we can relate a lot of that to individuals not leaving the actual building. So planning, practicing, drilling, and repeating that is very essential. Next is going to be the life safety. We have physical injury and we have behavioral or mental injuries, and we have to be cognitive of both of those. So making sure you have measures in place at your school, such as teaching the students, the teachers, and the parents something simple as hands-only CPR, stop the bleed training so that you can know how to actually address an emergency when it comes up, how to call 911, and who your trusted adults or mentors are for children. And it revolves into many, many issues that we see right now in our nation related to injuries, both mentally and physically. Thank you.
Very much. Our next question is for Ms. Clendaniel. The past few years have been very difficult for our students. We are seeing kids who are struggling to adjust, both socially and emotionally. What can we do for our students to ensure they have a safe learning space?
Thank you for that question. Can you guys hear me okay? Awesome. So I think the biggest thing is to identify which students are struggling as quickly as possible and getting them into supportive services. Because we know that students who are socially and emotionally well, they're much more able to learn in the classroom, feel safe in the classroom, and be well. And schools, I think, have a wonderful, wonderful grasp on which students are struggling, especially when they are showing outward-facing symptoms. But there are students who won't let you know, and they fly under the radar. So at Healthier Kids Foundation, what we're doing is we are providing wellness checks. They take about 10 minutes per student, where students answer questions about how they've been feeling over the last 7 days. So it's focused on their strengths, their emotions, and their thoughts. And last year we were able to screen 2,600 students in Santa Clara County. 44% of those students had some amount of unmet need identified, and actually 2% of those kids were in imminent risk at the time of the screening. And to be quite honest with you, teachers and administrators at those schools found that some of the students that were identified, they were surprised by some of those that were identified. And so we know that a screening is only useful if we are able to support the student who has been identified and getting into care. And so Healthier Kids Foundation also has a team that is working with those parents in their preferred language to connect them to services. A lot of the time it's behavioral health services, but often it is also basic needs support services. Just gonna make sure I cover all my bases here. So, thank you. But so really it's when we identify and adequately identify kids who are struggling, who may be flying under the radar, and get them into care quickly, that's when we're able to create a really safe environment for them in the classroom so that they can learn and they can grow. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Our next question goes to Mrs. Sayak. Do most schools have an anonymous reporting platform for bullying or violence?
Yes, a majority of the schools that we work with do have a platform for anonymous reporting, but what we've seen is there's two separate. One is anonymous, where they report have there been incidents of bullying or violence, but what we're also encouraging our schools to participate in are confidential mechanisms to share specific incidents so that those can be resolved and addressed. Particularly at the high school, we're seeing that we are trying to give students more empowerment so that they can report if there are sexual assaults, and the schools will then have a mechanism, a confidential mechanism, to help students work through that process. I think the challenges, what we're finding are, one, are students aware of this, and then two is their trust that they will actually be protected. And so what we found most effective is that if there are peer-to-peer support student groups that are actively advocating for these platforms, that there's inherent trust in other students rather than if there's adults or nonprofits such as Cassie mentioning it. And what's very heartening is to see that as we see a lot of these surveys being taken, that the numbers are increasingly showing that students are more aware and they are more trusting, and hopefully that continues and they see that there are advocates on campus that will continue to be there to protect them. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Mr. Chris Norwood will ask the next three questions. Also, we need to give our timekeeper some work. You have 3 minutes allotted for each question. However, if there's time remaining, any panel member who feels comfortable jumping in can use up the remaining time and so forth, so that people feel that the answers are to their fully answered to the best of their understanding. Again, no obligation. If not, we'll just go on to the next person. Thank you. Mr. Norwood.
The question that I have here starts again to Mr. Baxter. and that is, how does the fire department support students and school staff as it relates to mental and physical health?
Thank you for that question. So first of all, I encourage anybody listening or watching this to reach out and research your local fire department to see what your specific department does for your specific community. I'm going to speak to the San Francisco Fire Department and what we do to support our youth in our community, both mentally and physically. First and foremost is engagement. Engagement is so important. In our department, we have multiple programs within our actual schools where our uniformed firefighters, our uniformed EMTs and paramedics come to the school, sit with the students, and engage with them, encouraging them to excel in whatever they want to excel in, not just fire service or paramedicine or emergency services. The skill set and the knowledge we share with them has already proven with graduates who have become full-time firefighters, full-time clinicians, full-time college students, citing that the information they got and the encouragement they got was beneficial, if not instrumental, in their success. Secondly, understanding behavioral cues is extremely important for anybody, but specifically firefighters who are going to be engaged with individuals, whether it's during an emergency or simply just walking down a hallway or a street and being able to meet some of our amazing youth. Our fire department personnel are trained in what's called crisis communication, crisis intervention, and these are skills that allow us to understand and read specific signs of somebody who may be struggling and be able to provide them not only with the immediate care and compassion, but put them in touch with services that may be available for them immediately through their own community, through their school, or we have to realize some of these kids don't want to talk to somebody at their school. They don't want to talk to their parent. So we have to look at peer supports. So we're looking at a lot of community groups, specifically in the Bay Area, and there's so many that are very similar to after-school programs, but they're not run by the school. They're run by peers. Some of those peers may have criminal records and history, which means they have life experience. They have worn the shoes of that individual youth who may be just engaging or experiencing that, or may already be in that but doesn't want to be in that and doesn't know how to get out. So being able to understand that is, I think, crucial for the success of our youth to excel successfully in any society.
Thank you. The next question I have for Ms. Clendaniel. Have you seen an increased need for any specific supportive services for students? Have you seen an increased need for any specific supportive services for students, and what support systems would you recommend?
Awesome. Thank you for that question, and I'm going to encourage my colleagues here to also pipe up on this one because that is a really broad question. But yeah, absolutely. So Healthier Kids Foundation is providing these universal wellness checks that I was speaking about earlier. And we actually piloted those wellness checks during the pandemic in the 2020 year. And I so desperately wish that I had data to share with you from before the pandemic. But what I do have is the last couple of years. And so what we've seen is that actually the number of students who are being screened and identified as in imminent risk at the time of the universal wellness check, that number has come down. So that's good news. But the subset of kids that have unmet need identified but not in imminent risk, that category of kids or that group of students has risen. And so there is still a lot of need for these resources that we're offering to families. And so when we identify a student who is in need of supportive services, like I was sharing earlier, we have this team of parent advocates. They're walking the student, their parent through the screening results. They're normalizing the need for these types of services, and they are also speaking with them about what resources are available to them in the community that they can access, and they will stick with them through the process of accessing those services. And so what we've seen, the three major categories of referrals that the team is making is first to behavioral health services for counseling or support groups on campus. So that's about 32% of the referrals that we're making. The second category at 18% of referrals is actually for food services. And so there are a lot of basic needs that our families have that are not being met quite yet. And then next to that would be parenting workshops around healthy lifestyles. How do you implement structure and routine with your teenager or your fifth grader or whatever it is? And so I think services around capacity for behavioral health is always going to be something that I will bring up. Services for behavioral health, basic needs services, and also education for our families. And I would encourage, I think I got a little less than a minute left, so if anybody else wants to jump in on that question, please feel free to do so.
I'll jump. One startling statistic that I like to share, during the pandemic, one of our high schools, the number of referrals that we got from parents increased by 737%. So I think I'm going to echo the support that we're seeing is really to support parents as they continue to help their children. I think schools and community organizations such as ourselves can do so much, but parents are also struggling, and I think there's what we have seen, a need to augment and to help parents.
Thank you. My next question is for Twin Black. What steps do you perform to prevent partner or dating violence among teens?
So I think that prevention really is about understanding trauma and how it presents in terms of behavior, providing safe spaces for students to really be able to have difficult conversations, and in a way that restores relationships versus penalizes, and then early education and intervention. I think sometimes as adults, we think that we assume with our biases that students understand, teens understand what is a healthy relationship versus what's not a healthy relationship, but maybe their parents aren't the best role models, right? And if they are really into like social media or TV shows, all that stuff, there's so many different messages that really the stereotypes that are perpetuated by media is really the stereotypes that perpetuates the gender-based violence, right? So we have to be able to understand what our kids are talking about and watching, and having those conversations. You know, that's really not a safe, healthy relationship. You know, the messages from a lot of these teen shows is, if it doesn't hurt, it's not real love, right? And that's not true. So we have to be able to have these conversations with kids and talk about what a healthy relationship is and what a not healthy relationship is, and how power and control comes into play. So for the YWCA, our prevention team, we work with over 30 schools in Santa Clara County, and we provide teen empowerment presentations as well as teens ending abuse clubs. And so what we do is we provide them with what a healthy relationship is, what's not. How do we make safety plans, right? Body autonomy. So we provide them just information, and we do it in a way that they can relate to. So we will, for instance, show a snippet of a popular TV show, right? And then we'll discuss that show and say, okay, what do you think happened here? So, you know, that's what we do. For my team, we provided prevention education to over 46,000 people last year, 46,000 students and community members. That's a lot. For a team of 8, that's a lot. But it's still not enough.
Thank you, and those are super impressive numbers.
Thank you, Mr. Norwood. Our next question goes to Sheriff Johnson. What is your holistic view to best maximize safety regarding earthquakes and other dangers at schools?
Yeah, a great question. You know, it's interesting when you bring in earthquake, natural disasters, whatever it may be. You know, schools over the years, when I say years, probably 40, 50, if not longer, have actually done a very good job preparing the the students, the staff, to respond to natural disasters. It's actually, as you know, in the educational code, and required to have those mechanisms in place. Where I feel we don't do a great job and haven't evolved with the times as quickly as we should is really starting to look at some of the threats and the dangers that are presently existing in our society and are a threat to our students and the student body. And what I mean by that is mass casualty incidents that are really involving human interaction. And I think that's where we could do a better job in preparing our schools and our staff and bringing in all the different networks that need to be part of that conversation. We've done a better job of that in bringing school safety protocols into place within school districts. But what's interesting to that conversation is in the late 1990s, I was working with the Los Angeles County Office Education Safe School Center for school safety protocols throughout the Los Angeles region. And we put many mechanisms in place, primarily as a result of some of the active shooter type incidents that we were seeing in our country in the 1990s. And at the time, they seemed to be rising at an alarming rate, right? But here we are in 2023, and I can almost assure you that we still don't have school safety plans in place for every school within our jurisdiction. Many do, but there's several that don't. And that, to me, is a travesty, because if we don't start realizing that these man-engaged activities or these human-engaged threats can happen at our school, we're doing our community a disservice. So I'm very much an advocate for making sure certain protocols and operational procedures are in place and the relationships are connected. For example, one of the things that we just did, and obviously you heard I'm new, but we need to have a relationship with our schools, meaning law enforcement. Every law enforcement agency should at least have someone who's known for each school as their law enforcement liaison. And that person is involved in helping the schools develop these school safety plans, responses, and procedures so that we all know what's going to happen. And the reason I share that is because we can put a safety plan in place, just like you said, for an earthquake or fire, and schools will practice, going to Captain Baxter's importance, they'll practice that plan, but if the plan's never there, they'll never practice, and the confidence in that incident would be lost. So I think school safety response is something that should be well-versed throughout the organization, all the way to the student body, so they know what to do in an earthquake. They know what to do in a fire, and hopefully they'll never have to know what they have to do in an active shooter type incident. But the probability is real, so I think we need to make sure that these mechanisms are in place. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question to Mr. Jimmy Brown. Do schools have events for students to interact with teachers and counselors, in your experience?
Okay. Thank you for having me. I'm a former August Boger student, former
All
Mount
right,
Pleasant.
August Boger, very good.
Yeah. Robert Sanders, Mount Pleasant, August Boger, shout out. So, yeah.
Excellent.
Yes, it's good to be home. With that being said, there are parent-teacher nights, back-to-school nights, open house, those types of things that are here for us to interact with families and with staff. But due to the pandemic, we've seen a lot of that stuff's gone virtual. So we used to do parent info nights and have like myself as a clinician do some workshops on how to deal with your kids and devices and certain things, and parents would come and they'd participate and they'd get some more insight, and so they'd interact with the therapist, they'd interact with the counselor, they'd interact with certain community members. So we're seeing less and less of that. And to piggyback on the sheriff's comments, we need to create more of a community. And I think the more we do like movie nights, like last year we did in our district, Oak Grove, we did a movie night. We showed the movie Angst, and it has that shows a child struggling with mental health issues and how to be support, and just goes in detail about how that child was going through, you know, the challenges of being a teenager and the hormonal changes and the, you know, devices and everything. So I think the relationship could be better. I think it's a big issue for me. It scares me because I work in the middle schools and I see that there's a divide. We've taught our teachers, and our teachers have this perspective, and I don't know how to correct it right now, but that the kids are dangerous, right? We were taught that. They're gonna kill us, they're gonna, if they come to us, they're gonna give us the virus and we're gonna give it to our aunties. So coming back from that, we haven't really transitioned well from that. And in order to reestablish a connection with our community members, we need to create more time intentionally to reconnect. So I think, yeah, there's opportunities for those things, but I think we need to be a little bit more deliberate, like, I don't know, having popcorn night, or, you know, game night, charades, I don't know. I'm not a part of that committee, but I'm just telling you it needs to happen so that we can become a more secure community, more connected. So like Sheriff was talking about, where if there's a kid who's struggling and who's on the outs, if we're a community, we see him, we see her, and we bring them back so that they don't come here and shoot the school up. So that we can get them the support, like, something's wrong with Tommy. Can somebody check in with him? We need those relationships so that we can keep our children safe. So from a mental health standpoint, I think we can do more. I think connecting to the community is key, it's crucial, it's everything. And I think I'm just gonna leave it right there. I'm sorry, I've been talking too much, so I'm gonna go ahead. I don't wanna get to 15-minute cue, 15 seconds.
All right. Well, thank you very much for that question and answer.
Thank you.
The next question goes to Ms. Rico Sayak. Some students are still struggling with social interaction since the pandemic. What types of counseling support systems are offered?
Thank you. And I'm going to just piggyback that really it's engagement that's so vital. And so for Cassie, we're a nonprofit that partners with schools, and we place our therapists on campus so that our therapists are part of the fabric of the school, so that students get to know the therapist, and we really start to destigmatize what it means to ask for mental health support. So what does that look like? We're in schools, local, public and private, pre-K all the way up to high school, and it's very age appropriate. So we do tiered services where, beginning with tier 1, it's preventative work, perhaps it's building wellness centers, proactive classroom lessons, working with school staff, providing classroom presentations, school-wide assemblies. We do that, and then hopefully there's less need for what we call tier 2, which is the intervention. We do individual counseling where we work with students that have been referred to us that need ongoing support, either for a specific goal or if they have an IEP. We do group counseling. We also do parent education work. And then if needed, if there is a crisis on campus, we're there to help do the assessment, the crisis protocols, and then eventually a reentry plan if a student is hospitalized. So I think the support is available in many forms, and working with the school to tailor what is most needed. And if a school has its own support team, how we can best supplement and fill that gap. But because what we all know is that there's just not enough, and so we really try to make sure that we're nimble so that we can support what a school has and what is needed and be that safety net.
Thank you very much. This is a very important area. Would anyone else like to chime in on that question? I'll read it again. Some students are still struggling with social interaction since the pandemic. What types of counseling support systems are offered? Any takers?
No, I actually, I'll just pipe in, you know, the connectedness piece is huge, right? And especially when it comes to safety of an environment. Both these speakers hit it perfectly. I mean, you have to look at how our students are being engaged and how they're connecting. And one of the things, again, going back to my question earlier that I responded to, we can be part of that equation. Because to the comment that was made, you may notice on the school that something's wrong, and I think the name was Johnny. We'll use Johnny as a hypothetical. But you'll know Johnny's, disconnected, doesn't seem to be interacting. Well, that's only one piece of the pie. We may have another piece of that pie in the community and how he's interacting at home. Where we fail at times, again, is sharing and bringing all the pieces together to see how do we connect this student with something, because they have to get engaged and connected to something so that they don't become that shooter of the future. So I really think that's an important piece that could go on for a whole 8 hours, but we won't. So.
All right, well, thank you very much. And Mr. Norwood has the next set of questions.
This question is for Twin. Is there enough funding from local and state agencies for prevention of bullying or partner violence to do the work that you do?
I heard some snickers from my fellow nonprofit people. And kind of like the mental health supports, it's never enough, right? I mentioned that our prevention team reached over 46,000 people. Eight people did that. 8 people. So we have a huge problem with, and we had to turn down requests because the need is there, the staff is not, right? And the hiring and retention of staff is difficult because, especially for nonprofits, right? There's burnout, there's a high cost of living. We can't compete as a nonprofit, or most nonprofits, especially smaller nonprofits, with the salaries in the tech industry, right? So with all of those things, it's really difficult. And then we also are hamstring. A lot of us, for stability, rely on government grants. For stability, it's great. For maneuverability, it's terrible, right? Because there are very set standards. So let me give you an example. We have a 5-year grant or 4-year grant that we received from the state of California to do prevention education in a handful of high schools. Well, we were lucky enough to receive a 5-year extension. However, we get the same amount on the 5th year as we did in the 1st year. Now, what's happened in 5 years? Not a lot, right? Pandemic, insurrection, Floyd riots, I mean, you name it, it's happened, right? Inflation. But we're getting the same amount that's paying for 1.15 FTE. We can't just not give them a raise, it's not right. So we have to give them cost of living raises, but we have to take it from other areas, not from the government grants that we mostly rely on. And now California had a 6.25% COLA this last year. Did we see any of that? No, right? But I bet you our, correction officers, teachers, everyone else benefited some part. But CBOs typically don't benefit from COLAs, and that's a shame. And I think that when we as a society put more emphasis on or even I'll settle with equal. And when I say emphasis, I mean dollars, right? On violence prevention efforts versus our justice system, that's when we're really gonna be tipping the scale and reduce violence on instead of having Band-Aid approaches, it's really gonna be, okay, we're heading in that direction. And when I say prevention education or prevention efforts, I include our education system in that, right? But as we know, we live in California, and even though a lot of people put words and say, yes, education is important, but when it comes down to dollars in California, that's not the case, right? So we really need to turn that and put just as much money into our education and prevention efforts as our justice system.
Thank you. Yes, there's a few snaps and claps and, all of that good stuff there with those questions, absolutely. And this next question is for Mr. Johnson. What is your view on how school boards can best support our schools from danger as a matter of policy?
Yeah, I think the policy issue, and again, as I mentioned earlier, I think policy can easily be put in place to ensure that schools have safety plans associated and designed for mass casualty incidents. And the reason I keep going back to that is because there's a difference in the response from both fire and law enforcement to a mass casualty incident involving human interaction than a natural disaster. A natural disaster is going to have a different response, different variables in play. So it's a separate emergency response plan, and it's very detailed. And that's why, again, I feel some schools have participated in that collaboration in developing those plans, and others are still lagging behind. But as a board, that could be a policy and direction that we will have a school safety plan in place for every school within our jurisdiction. We will have a school safety liaison with our law enforcement agency so we can have a direct connection for services and how we provide services to our community. We can put in threat assessment teams. Threat assessment teams, and we could speak all day long on this. I have been chiming for threat assessment teams, wraparound threat assessment teams in schools since the 1990s, and yet very few schools have a wraparound threat assessment team. And what I mean by that and the importance of that, and actually you can do it by law without a whole lot of adjustment, because the Family Education and Privacy Act, FERPA, actually has a carve-out in there for school safety coordinators associated with schools can actually be involved in those conversations. And that's been what's preventing us from a policy standpoint. There's so much legal reason that we can only share certain information, right? Whether it's HIPAA, the mental status, but if you're working in a MOU, and this is back to policy, if you enter into a memorandum of understanding with your law enforcement agency that serves your schools, you can actually put a law enforcement officer on that threat assessment team that, again, provides you insight and access to things that could be very, very beneficial to mitigate incidents from escalating. And again, I think there's a lot of good work that is being done, but I think there's a lot of room for improvement. And it's something, as a sheriff for this county, I'm going to be very adamant about, working towards that progress and moving forward every day to make our schools as safe as possible. Because here's the reality, and I'll close with this. If our students don't feel safe, and it doesn't matter what the reason is they don't feel safe, maybe it's from gang violence, maybe it's from domestic violence in their home, maybe it's from their peers. But think about this, if they don't feel safe and they're thinking about that threat of whatever it may be, what aren't they thinking about? Learning.
Absolutely.
It's that simple. We need them to be focused on learning and feel safe, and it's our job to make sure they work and live in the safest environment possible. So again, I'm hoping we can collaborate on a lot of these efforts to make sure that those mechanisms are in place.
Thank you. And my next question for Mr. Brown. What resources are available for schools and family members for students dealing with mental health issues?
Okay, this is a big question, and I thank you for asking it. But the greatest resource we have is our parents first. You parents, treat your kids like you pay the bills, please. Let's start with that first. Make sure you have conversations with your kids. That's the first line of defense, right? That talk to your kids, know who they are. Don't let them lock you out of their room. So I'm not trying to attack or go after parents. I just want to empower you to parent your kids in a way that allows you to supervise them. You send them to school, you expect us to supervise them at break and lunch, right? So when you have them at home, make sure you supervise them online as well, okay? So we'll supervise them when they're here, but do I need to get in here? Okay, I'm gonna get in there. All right. So when they're here, we'll supervise them. But when they're at home, you need to supervise them, whether it's online or outside playing with their friends. Be nosy, be in their business, be in their faces. That's first and foremost, okay? So that's my number one thing, as I just had to get that out there. But then at schools, there's school psychologists, there's counselors at the middle schools. Some counselors are at elementary schools. We have MSW interns in our district. We have MFT interns, and then there's schooling services as well. So there's other nonprofit organizations like Alum Rock, like Gardner Mental Health, like,
Pacific clinics.
Yeah, Pacific Clinics, where I used to work a while ago. And it's a big issue, and the biggest issue for me, so I work in Oak Grove, and I've been supervising interns, and I have 12 interns. They're all full. Their caseloads are all full. And then there's also schooling services, and they're all full. So there's not enough therapists for the need for kids. There's wait lists for kids. So there's a lot of supports, but there's not enough. And like everybody's been saying, we need more money so that we can staff the people who provide the support that our kids need. And it's not going to happen unless we start making it a priority. And I think our district is doing a decent job, but there's more still to do. And please, if you're watching and you want to be a therapist, go back to school and let's make it happen. I know a good supervisor. But please, get your kids the mental health support that they need, and please be the first line of defense at home. Notice what's going on in the home, and parent your kids like you pay the bills.
Can I just add a closing point to that?
Yes.
Because it's really, really important what he just said. And whether you're the parent, the guardian, the caregiver, a friend, just letting somebody know that you care matters. And why I'm gonna tell a quick little story that I think emphasizes this point, because it's never left me and it's been years, is I've looked at a lot of active shooters incidents in our schools throughout our country over the last 30 years, and I'll never forget one where a young man who committed atrocities on a school, killed several students, and they arrested him and they investigated and they interrogated him and they asked him a question is, why did you do this? I mean, what, right? We all want to know why after every one of these incidents. And he said, what does it matter? Nobody cares. And they said, well, that's not true. Your parents are right outside. They're really concerned about you. He goes, they don't love me. And the investigator asked, well, what makes you think that? And this is a response that's never left me. He said, my dad stopped loving me when he stopped wrestling with me when I was 13. Now that's what was in his head. But what that said to me, and I was a father of 2 sons at the time, I went home and I started wrestling with my boys. Whether they wanted to wrestle or not, we were gonna wrestle. But my point is, you never know, right? Unless you have that conversation and make that connection of what they need in their lives. So, well said, well said.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. And what I'd like to do, I know, Mr. Baxter, you've been down there just patiently waiting. And although this question isn't directly towards you, I'd like you to chime in on it from the perspective of your work. And what are some of the common signs you see of people struggling with trauma or mental health in your work?
So this is probably one of the biggest factors we see in society right now with behavioral health care, but also the lack of behavioral health care or the lack of knowledge of behavioral emergencies. And a behavioral emergencies is going to lead to, if not already with an individual, into physical harm or death. Having, and just going back to what we just talked about, that engagement and that awareness and that conversation so that you specifically know the person you're standing next to. And that person does not have to be your family member, does not have to be your coworker, does not have to be the person that you are responding to, whether you're a clinician, a public servant, a teacher. It's the person standing next to you. How are you? My name's Jonathan. So happy to be standing next to you. See what the actual response is. There's so many signs that we don't have enough time, really, in all honesty, to really factor in what are the signs that we're seeing with behavioral emergencies and mental health. But we do have the time to say, be human, be compassionate, open your ears, listen, open your arms, embrace, open your hearts, and care. Let that person standing next to you know that they are our future, my future. I tell kids in our school programs all the time, specifically the ones that want to be public servants. I'm going to be older and at home, probably with a walker at some times, and I'm going to fall down. And you are very likely going to be the person who comes to my emergency. And I want to share with you my compassion so you can give me that compassion later. And that instills not only honesty in my part, but hope for the person who you're talking to. And I know we're talking about children, but it also really reflects with our adults. Because if we can give that gift to an adult, that adult is essentially going to take it back to their children. And their children are going to embrace it, and they're going to have something to look forward to. When we're looking at our specific areas, if you're a teacher specifically, if you're a parent, and you have students or your children's friends who come over, learn something about them. Learn their demeanor. Because we're pretty smart, we're humans. We're going to pick up on that small sign that is different. But we're also our worst enemies. Because when we see that difference in a person's attitude or demeanor, we typically, as humans, go, they'll be okay. They must just be having a bad day. Take the step forward, get out of your comfort zone, and ask them, what's wrong? Is something's wrong? And if that voice in your head is saying, that's not the response I wanted to, engage with their parents, with their friends, or with their teachers to make sure that that person is okay.
Thank you, thank you. Yeah, we got some more claps, we got some more snaps on that one as well. I want to bring that question back around for Mariko. I'll repeat the question again. What are some of the common signs, and I'll frame it in the form of education, what are some of the common signs of students struggling with trauma or mental health?
Thank you. And it's hard to follow what Captain Baxter said. He said it so eloquently. And I think there's a theme that we're hearing, and it really is engagement. Because the common signs that you should be concerned about, it's not a specific point in time. It's changes in behavior. It's erratic changes in a person's behavior. And so a couple of examples. For someone that's gregarious and outgoing, all of a sudden, for 2 weeks to a month, if they withdraw, if they don't come out of their room, if they don't wake up, if they don't eat, that's a serious erratic change in behavior. If you see a child, a student doing physical activities that can harm oneself, excessive use of drugs, excessive use of alcohol, out of control driving, again, look for erratic, excessive changes in behavior. And to really know what that is means you have to be engaged with how they are to be able to notice that shift and that swing. One other thing I said, most of the times you're looking at patterns, but anytime a child talks about harming oneself, even jokingly, you should always take it seriously. And that's reach out to, on your campus, there are many people who know what to do, but absolutely, the minute someone talks about no plans in the future, harming themselves, talking about plans for doing so, that's a red flag that one must take very seriously.
Definitely appreciate your comment about in order to know, you should know, right? In order to know what's going on with someone, you need to know them or be aware of their behaviors. So thank you very much, panelists. And at this time, we're going to look to our audience and ask if you have any questions of the panel. So I'll turn around and give you guys a couple of seconds, but she's already ready. So we're going to ask her a question of the panel.
Hi, my name is Crystal Calhoun. So I'm the elder leader of the San Jose Unified Equity Coalition, and we're a grassroots organization. We're working in San Jose Unified, so we're working on the mental health, restorative justice, and all of these things, and we're working with San Jose Downtown Wellness Center. But so many places, like she said, it's not enough money. So then that's when the kids are telling you at San Jose High that they don't have a counselor there at all, and we're saying, oh yeah, well the county said, and the teachers and the kids are like, well, where they at? So it needs to be more obvious and tell us where it is, because these kids are asking for help. They're asking, they just don't know where to go.
So I think the question was, where can the schools get access to the resources that they're in need of in terms of either staffing or funding?
One more point I just wanted to make. Everyone here, if I could just have your information and, possibly later on, I could contact you guys, because we're really working hard on this issue, and I'd love to stay in contact with everybody and let everybody know what all of these great opportunities you guys are talking about.
Yep, so we got that part, right? You got a contact here with somebody, an advocate, a community champion. So the question comes back to, how can school districts in partnership get access to the resources, the human resources, as well as possibly the funding to make the difference in San Jose Unified and other campuses in the district?
Well, I think the board's got to know. I think the board's got to know how important it is to the community. The board has to understand that this has to be a priority. And I believe in school boards, and I believe that there's people in the majority of the school boards that will agree with this, but making sure that somebody takes this on, and somebody who has the savvy and the passion to go after it and to make it a high priority, so that it becomes not only just a district issue, but it becomes a state issue and a nation issue. Because I tell my interns all the time, there's a wave coming, and be ready for it, because there's gonna be a tsunami that we can't take care of. We need to take care of as many as we can, but we can't take care of them all. And we're starting to see it. And no matter, as soon as I get a new intern, they're overbooked. I can't get enough in. So yeah, this is a big issue, and we're gonna have to not just throw money at it. We're gonna have to, bombard money at it. We're gonna have to really push to make these services happen, because it's not just my program, but all the programs that serve our district are full. They're at capacity, and we got kids waiting on a list. And it breaks my heart seeing those names on that list. So that's just where I'm at with it. I don't know.
And I think that, sorry.
Yes, no, go ahead. And then we'll go Rico.
I also think that there's really not too many nonprofits that if there's a school or a community in need, that they'll say, no, we can't because we're not getting paid for it. The nonprofit industry itself is we want to make a difference. So we will jump in and do the work and find out how to pay for it later. And an easy way to, and if there's a huge community need and a coalition of multiple agencies working together, that is how we can get things done and how we can get funded.
Rico.
I was exactly going to say that. Please reach out, because we are on some campuses. There are some schools that can't afford it, and so we work with the school itself, find funders, and just broker it together. We have lots of community organizations that recognize this is a need that communities need to step up for, and several of them are looking at ways they can augment what schools and school districts can financially provide.
Thank you. I know we also have our timekeeper here, again, the president of the Morgan Hill School District. He may have a question. If you have a question, I'd like to give you the mic at this time.
You know how dangerous that is. But thank you for the last question. One of the ways that Derek and Chris and I know each other's, we serve on a legislative action committee of county trustees, so it's really good to hear the broad community interest and support for mental health resources. It's something we've been pushing, but I can say we'll redouble our efforts. But to the panel, a question I have is, you know, I've often heard about red flag laws, but as a trustee, I don't really understand them. I understand mandatory reporter for certain kinds of things, but a red flag law, as I understand, is if a school staff person knows of a student, you know, at such a level of crisis that they fear this may present a threat of the kind of things the sheriff talked about, you know, then there's some mechanism to, like, contact law enforcement, or maybe you know, have any weapons removed from their home. But yeah, so I've heard about this, I've heard these things happen, but what I'm not clear about as a policymaker is what should our, I mean, there's privacy, but the implications of that are huge on all sides. So we have many professionals here. As a school district, what should our policy be around that, and how should we train people, and how do we implement this concept? Because I'm really unclear how to do my job.
I'll take the first shot at it. And one of the things, and it goes back to the comment I made earlier, is, well, and actually what was said earlier about these various threats. I mean, and one of the things that we don't do well enough is really educate the student body, the teachers, the administrators, the board members, of the magnitude of the different levels of threats. And there is so much research out there now, so many incidents that have occurred, especially when it comes to gun-related violence in our schools, that really kind of show you the progression of things. And we can, and I'm having a flashback because I did years ago a presentation to a student body in a gym just like this about all the warning signs that have been identified leading up to a mass casualty incident. And it could start as a very minor warning sign that you just notice Johnny, and I hate to keep using Johnny because if anybody's here named Johnny, but that was, if Johnny just all of a sudden started showing up and he hasn't shaved, or, you know, he's letting his hair grow long, and some may say, well, geez, that's not typical of Johnny. Well, that doesn't need to be, maybe, we don't need to dial 911 yet, because it's a combination of warning signs that start to add up. And where they get to the point that was made earlier, what I considered imminent warning signs, meaning a threat of violence, a threat of suicide, self-harm, violence against others, those, in my opinion, have to be reported. They really do need to be reported because, again, we may have insight to behavioral issues on the other side, and where those red flag laws come into place, and now in the county we're getting better at it, we, law enforcement, have the ability to not only investigate them, look into them, but we can actually help prepare a restraining order, a gun violence restraining order against somebody that's exhibiting these signs. And that's where it gives us the authority to take guns potentially out of the home. Very similar to domestic violence laws that have always been in place, but now we can extend that to any family member for the safety of the community. And that's something the law enforcement agencies are getting better at doing over the last few years, but that should almost be something that's automatically looked into, meaning the follow-up. Because a lot of times when something is reported to us, we may ask the school, what do you want us to do with it? And sometimes schools don't want, well, can you just talk and find out? There needs to be follow-up mechanisms in place so everybody can have comfort that all of these aspects have been looked into. So there's a room for improvement in that area, but I appreciate the question.
So I don't know if other districts have experienced this, but this last year, there's been this, like, TikTok, social media craze where students will say, threaten a school shooting, right? And it's gone viral. So for us, being Gilroy, we take it very seriously, and we, as soon as we hear some rumors, we immediately contact our school resource officers who will do a threat assessment, visit the student's home, search for, making sure it is or not a credible threat. Luckily, none of them, and we've had a lot this year, none of them have been credible threats, but, we definitely take it very seriously and work with local law enforcement to ensure that we're communicating.
And I'll just kind of add on to just closing this up. As a responder who has responded to the aftermath of horrible events, whether it's at a school, whether it's at a home, it involves a child, it involves a youth. It could be your son, your daughter, your student. It doesn't matter, it's a youth, it's a person, it's a human being. And when we look at policy, please remember what I just said, it's a human being. So we might be affecting one person with the policy, or maybe enacting that policy by making a phone call to law enforcement, or making a phone call to a parent. But who are we saving by making that phone call? That's the great unknown. What we do know, and we can look at history, and we can look at events like the sheriff stated, utilizing active shooter as an example. And one common theme is the behavioral analysis, or the behavioral threat analysis that we have, the indicators of that. And nobody did anything. Nobody called it in. And in some of these cases, a teacher had a suspicion. A parent had a suspicion. A friend had a suspicion. But something we need to get away from in society is this misinformation that by saying something is wrong. Saying something is empowering. Saying something is life-saving. We can't sit here and go, if I say something to a teacher or to a police officer or to an adult figure, I'm going to be looked at as a person who's calling someone out. And I might even have the parents get upset. I might have the actual school get upset, or my neighbors get upset for that. What if your action saved somebody's life? And when we look at, I use Hollywood in a lot of my speeches. When we look at Hollywood, we see the negative. And I'm going to use Johnny, Sheriff, sorry. Johnny narked on Billy, and now nobody likes Johnny. They never say, Johnny spoke up and saved Billy's life. So when we're looking at policies, please remember the human aspect behind it. And I'm going to close on this. As a 32-year experienced public servant, I've seen the aftermath of not speaking up. I've been the person who's had to make the last call of life. I've been the person who has to tell the parent that their child is never coming home. And I've been the first responder who has heard from an adult figure, a person responsible for the safety of another, that they felt something was wrong, but they did not speak out. Please let that resonate. Please speak out. And please, when we're looking at policies, no matter what district you're in, no matter what agency you're in, please always take that big breath, lean back in your chair, and remember the humans behind that policy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have an online question, and I'll throw this up to anyone. How can teachers help students who need help ask for help? That is, the student that's shy or afraid to ask for the assistance that they need.
I can answer. In many of our schools, if there is a teacher that they've identified that needs some support, they just send them to Cassie or to the Wellness Center. And we are trained to sit with the child. We're trained to ask the questions to make them feel comfortable. We're trained to sit there quietly until they are ready to speak to us. But oftentimes, for teachers and staff who don't know what to do, but they recognize that something needs to be done, that's where you call us, and we can do that assessment, we can do that referral, and we can take the next step.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, usually a caring adult kind of holds their hand. So ask them who they feel comfortable with on staff, whether it's the yard duty or the custodian or the IT team person. Doesn't matter who it is. Just have somebody who they feel comfortable with that can get them to somebody that can give them the support they need. Yeah. So that's the number one thing. If you notice and then they acknowledge that they do need help, then, that's more than half the battle. We're almost all the way there. So we can just get them what they need once we have that acknowledgement. Because the hardest part is them coming forward and speaking out. And like she said, some of these kids are shy. But asking those next level questions, like, what's been going on? How are you? What's been going on with you today? Is there something else you need? You seem a little bit off. Just those little questions that can give you a little bit more information. And then say, you know what, maybe we should talk to, is there somebody you feel comfortable talking with, or somebody that needs to come in here that will make you feel a little bit more comfortable, and then you might get a more supportive answer.
Right, thank you. I'd like to ask a follow-up question to that. Given the student that's shy and afraid to ask for help, how common is that? Is there a difference between elementary, middle, and high school? I'll throw that up to you.
I'm happy to answer. There definitely is a difference. And there's cultural barriers, language barriers. So I think it goes back to the original theme of get to know the child, to see where they're at currently and see where you can, when you can start to see how you can support. Oftentimes, and I think that's why you're starting to see more effort in wellness centers, it's just a safe place to go to. I know when I was growing up, but you hear about people sitting in the stalls of a bathroom. You just sometimes need a quiet space to get away from everyone, and wellness centers popping up on schools are becoming more and more used, and again, utilizing the campus so that students know where there's quiet, safe places for them.
Right, thank you very much. Oh, Laura.
No, I think that Mariko nailed it with that response. Really, it is knowing the student, and I just want to echo what all of the panelists have said here. Knowing your students, knowing the kid or the child, and then really giving them the support when they're ready for it. There's no way that you can force that on anybody, and creating a space that does feel safe enough for them to be able to do that, whether that is with you or like Jimmy, I'm sorry. Jimmy had mentioned earlier, maybe it's somebody else on campus who can offer that support.
Well, thank you very much. Any other questions from our audience? I'd like to also recognize our board president from Mount Pleasant, Ms. Melissa Gott Lopez. She's here. Right. Okay. We'll go down the line. And any final words from our esteemed panelists? We'll start with Captain Baxter.
First of all, I want to thank everybody here for inviting me to speak to all of you, and I hope some of what I had to share resonates and is helpful. I heard a theme related to and revolving around mental health, mental awareness, and behavioral emergencies. So anybody who's listening to this or anybody who's sharing this, if you're experiencing some sort of a behavioral emergency or you're in a mental crisis at this time, or you just feel that something inside is wrong and you need somebody to talk to, you can simply call 988 anywhere in California, and you'll get a trained clinician, a peer support. And if you don't know the difference between a clinician and a peer support person is someone just like you. And I'm talking to you, whoever's listening, just like you, and they'll help you out. I also want to encourage anybody to remember your mentors who are out on the streets 24/7 and are there to help. Your teachers, who I take my hat off to, seriously believing they have the hardest job in America. Those are your mentors. Feel and be comforted knowing that you can go talk to them. Your police officers, uniformed police officers who are out and about, stop them. No matter what you've heard, make your own experience. Engage with that person in that uniform, because that person is just like you and they're there to help you out. So please, in closing, reach out, talk to somebody, and embrace the gift of knowledge and embrace the gift of helping yourself.
Great, thank you, Captain Baxter.
Now I gotta go next, huh?
You're next.
You hit me with all the nuggets. You hit me with all the nuggets, and now I gotta go,
You got
huh?
this, you got this.
Just know, those of you that are out there, especially the people in the Black community that's 2% or less here in San Jose, that there are black therapists out there, and you can, from the east side, become a therapist yourself. I'm the walking, talking evidence of that. I want to also say to all of us and the parents that we got to realize that kids these days are overstimulated, distracted, and under-socialized. So we have to find a way to give them the social experience that we got when we were playing outside. If you were being mean, then you didn't get to play in the games. Like, we need to re-socialize our kids and not let them be so distracted by their devices and not let them be overstimulated by their devices, because it just creates more depression and anxiety, and we just want to stay away from that. So be active with your kids, be involved, combat what I've just talked about, the overstimulated, the under-socialized, and the distracted. So thank you. That's all I have to say, and thank you for your time. And it's great to be back in my community. I love being here. I love Boger. Go Bobcats.
All right, thank you, Jimmy.
Thank you
Ms.
for
Laura.
that. Another tough act to follow. I just really want to thank everybody who's here in this room, who's putting their time and their energy around conversations like we've had today. This is really where it starts. I'm really grateful to be here with each of you, to share the work that we've been doing. And I also want to speak to the need that came up earlier. We've all heard it time and time again that the funding is not there for mental health services right now. And that's something that we're really trying to champion at Healthier Kids Foundation, is identifying how big is this need that we're talking about. We know the kids who are struggling and who are obviously struggling, but that doesn't mean that the kids who are being quiet and suffering in silence don't need it too. And so what we're hoping to do is to really take those numbers from our wellness checks and our screenings so that we can advocate for what those numbers really should look like in our community. What is the need? What is capacity? Should capacity look like? And we got a lot of work to do. It's going to be a journey, but we're committed to it. So this is how it starts. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Ms. Daniel. Trustee Flack.
Yes, so, I am also grateful to be here with my fellow panelists. And I think the theme, is that connectedness, engagement. For me, it's sense of belonging, right? So if every single one of our students have a sense of belonging somewhere, whether it's at school, at home, in their community, at church, if they have that, they will succeed. I think the issues are that the students that are struggling don't have that sense of belonging. And we all work in silos. Like this whole we all work in silos. Mm-hmm. Can you imagine what we can accomplish if we all work together for one common goal? And that's the direction I'd like to see us in.
Right, thank you very much. Sheriff Johnson.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate the opportunity to participate in this tonight, but I would also say, and even though I've been focused somewhat on school safety protocols and procedures, I do think there's tremendous value, can you hear me? Okay. Tremendous value in really supporting the wellness centers that are on our schools, because to the point that was made, I mean, we are all have too much stimulus coming into our brains. Teenagers, young adults, even more so. And we have to work on stabilizing not only the body, but the mind, and really giving them the opportunity. Is this one just not working? Oh, okay, well. With that, I would just say I will always be an advocate for mental health, resiliency, compassion training in our schools, because I think they need it. And the one thing I guess I would just close with is, this whole culture of care really needs to be emphasized, that we're looking to take care of everyone in the school systems and for them to take care of themselves. And the reality is, it's okay not to be okay, right? Because that's the reality. We all go through these stressful moments in life, so always there to support.
Okay, thank you. And again, just want to offer gratitude for putting this very important panel together. As I was coming here, my son, a high schooler, was worried about what he had just read in Half Moon Bay and was wondering if it was on a school campus. So the threat is there, the fear is there, and we need to take bold action. And so you mentioned that you're a legislative action committee. Let's look at a partnership. Let's go straight, work upstream, and look at how we revamp the system so we're not reliant on county grants or direct revenue streams, and think of maybe there's different opportunities where we look at mental health as a community, not what we can only afford by the grants that we're given. So thank you.
Thank you. And a big hand for our panelists. Thank you very much. Captain Jonathan Baxter from San Francisco, Mr. Jimmy Brown, counselor therapist from Oak Grove School District. I'm familiar with Oak Grove. We work together.
Absolutely.
Ms. Laura Clendaniel, who's a vice president of programs for the Healthier Kids Foundation, and trustee Twin Flack, who's also chief program officer for the YWCA, and of course our county sheriff, Bob Johnson, and executive director Rico Sayak from Cassie. So once again, let's give them a round of applause. Also, we have the African American Community Service Agency in the back who took registration. They also have COVID information and materials and resources. So they're making sure we're safe and happy. Again, thank you to my partners in crime, Mr. Chris Norwood, president of the Milpitas Unified School District, and also board president John Horner from the Morgan Hill Unified School District. I'm Derek Grasty. I'm vice president of the Mount Pleasant School District. Thank you, each and every one of you, for being here today. Thank you for your volunteerism, your commitment to education, school safety, and good night, everyone. Thank you.